tell me, what is FTD?
So FTD, also known as frontotemporal degeneration or frontotemporal dementia, is a neurodegenerative disease of the brain. And it affects, so it's actually a form of dementia that affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. It is very different than Alzheimer's, which is the most prevalent form of dementia, in three important ways. One is that it strikes younger on average. So FTD is actually the most prevalent form of dementia in individuals under the age of 60. Although we can see people become symptomatic anywhere from their 20s to their 80s, very sadly. And as you can imagine, hitting somebody in the prime of their life at that younger age, the disease has a much different impact on a family. Many of these people are still parenting children. They're still, at the height of their careers. So it's a very different experience for a family when it hits at that age. The second way that FTD differs from Alzheimer's is the part of the brain that is affected. As I said before, in FTD it's the frontal and the temporal lobes, that's how you get the name. And unlike memory, which is usually fairly well preserved in the early stages of FTD, what you lose is what's controlled by the frontal lobe, which is your personality, your executive functioning. So that's things like if you get up in the morning and you plan out your day and you can follow through on that plan. It's really the kinds of activities that many of us just use throughout the day, especially in some kind of professional career. And in the temporal lobe controls language, both receptive language, so the ability to understand when somebody's speaking to you or to read a lot of language, as well as expressive language. So the ability to generate sentences like you and I are generating right now. Also controlled by these two areas of the brain are kind of emotional control. And very importantly, the frontal lobe houses insight. So the ability you and I have to understand how I'm behaving, and if I were to change, if you retain that insight, you understand, wow, I'm losing some of my language abilities, or I'm behaving differently around my family. And the third way it's different from Alzheimer's is it's rare, just like ALS. We actually, because it's not a movement disorder, it's much harder to diagnose than ALS is. So we actually don't know the prevalence, but it's at least as prevalent as ALS. And so the combination of being rare, hitting younger, having this strange and unusual constellation of symptoms means that most people are misdiagnosed for years before they get this actual diagnosis.
Obviously very rare, just like ALS. And we're here today at the Target ALS Annual Meeting, so it might be very interesting, of course, to people watching from home wondering, we're talking about FTD at an ALS conference. So what is it that is an overlap, or what is the relation between ALS and FTD and some of these other diseases?
Half of people with FTD share the same exact pathology as those with ALS. And the most common genetic mutation that causes familial FTD is also the most common genetic variation that causes familial ALS. So that's C9orf72. Sadly, some of the people watching this may be familiar with that. But obviously, when you have one mutation that can cause either or both diseases, it's a very useful scientific tool. And there's a growing understanding or belief that ALS and FTD are actually, in many ways, the same disease along the same spectrum. And what's really different is which part of the nervous system that's affected. So if it's the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, you get the FTD symptoms I described earlier. If it's the motor neurons, you get ALS.
And well, it's been an honor to partner with your organization, and we did this terrific funding call, and there's great projects that have resulted from it. What are your thoughts on, obviously, searching for treatments and for biomarkers? What are your feelings overall? I mean, biomarkers seems to be it's elusive, right?
And yet it's our holy grail. I mean, yeah, if you think, again, about the symptoms I described earlier, if we had a diagnostic biomarker to tell people, this is actually what's going on in your brain during life, we'd be able to enroll them in clinical trials much more effectively. We'd be able to get them help, even just practical help for living with the disease. You'd be able to give them a better feel for what the future might hold. And as tragic as that is, I know a lot of people find it comforting to have some understanding of what's to come, and that enables them to get a little more prepared.
AFTD is it's an incredible organization, and we're very lucky to be partners with you. And I hope also that for individuals watching at home who may not have known about FTD, that this will raise some awareness of what is really a very traumatic neurodegenerative disease. Thank you, Susan, for your time. Really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the annual meeting.
It's great to talk to you. Thanks.